All right, welcome to the second FNC Roundtable. So today what we're talking about is meal plans, and pretty much in particular why we don't do them, why we don't do generic meal plans at FNC. Now, I'll probably just start off with the values of FNC because what they are is their education, their choice, and connection. And when we look at the choice aspect, it's really much aligned with autonomy. And that's where the clients have the freedom to choose what they want to work on, but also have the freedom to choose what they want to eat. So we don't actually tell our clients what to eat, especially in the form of a meal plan. We provide them with education. That's where the competence part of self-determination theory comes in. But we'll never explicitly tell someone what to eat because everyone is so different. I'd really love to get your guys' thoughts on this, but I kind of believe that writing a meal plan, or especially a generic meal plan, and expecting it to land on clients or a lot of clients, it's kind of like trying to win the lottery or win the jackpot of a poker machine. It is just so hard because everyone likes different things. They have different values with food as well. They eat at different times, and I think it's just so hard as a coach to even try and do. And yeah, let's kind of put it to the table.
All right, well, since no one else is talking, I'll go first then. So to add my initial thoughts, Josh, I really like it how you mentioned generic in meal plans. So to me, the definition of that would be creating a meal plan that is kind of like a one size fits all. The calories might be different, but everyone's getting the same amount of meals and snacks a day. Those meals are the same in terms of food selection. It's just the portions that are scaled. Yeah, there's numerous reasons why I don't endorse that approach, or we don't endorse that approach at FNC. Obviously, as you mentioned, it doesn't account for autonomy. It kind of puts the coach in the driver's seat, not the client. And also won't account for individual differences in preference, schedule, and that sort of stuff. So, therefore adherence might not be so great. And at the end of the day, the effectiveness of any nutrition intervention is ultimately limited by one's ability to consistently adhere to it. But another thought is that we don't do generic meal plans at FNC, but a custom-made, collaboratively made and produced or designed acute example day of eating is a strategy that I personally use from time to time with my clients. And I think that has a lot of utility in certain situations as a very short-term thing. If you want, I can go into the reasons for that, or we can leave that for now. What do you think? Or do you guys want to give your thoughts first?
Yeah, I think we typically usually call that like a sample day of eating that we run through with our clients in our consultations. So it might be based on whatever habits they're trying to build, or it could be at the very start of the client's journey as well. Okay, let's learn how to build meals that fit into your day, your lifestyle, based on the foods that you enjoy that fit like, the protein and plants model.
Yeah, I think it also is an opportunity for the client to rapidly create some awareness of what appropriate portion sizes feel like that aligns with what might be health seeking or goal aligned with them. So it sort of gives them that experience feeling of, okay, this is what I'm sort of going to feel like if my day-to-day diet aligns with what I'm trying to achieve here. And yeah, like you said, it can help them build some meals. You can collaboratively create a various options and toolkit items that can suit various different meals and snack opportunities. But I think, I want to make it clear that the collaboratively designed meal plan is, at least for me, where I would go through, well, how many meals and snacks do you want to have that are going to fit with your schedule? Let's talk about that. Okay, now let's talk about what meals and snacks you're currently having, and let's try and tweak them a little bit where possible to make them more goal aligned. If they don't know what to eat, I will ask permission to suggest some options, and we'll sort of go from there. So yeah, it's not like, hey, here's a meal plan, off you go. Oh, you didn't follow it too bad, so sad. Try harder next time. Macro Coach Steve style. It's we put the client in the driver's seat. They choose what they eat, how they do it, when they eat, and that way we're doing that so they're learning more, and also we're trying to support adherence.
Yeah, I think the thing I really like about what Max said there was it's almost like you're delineating a meal plan as a product versus like coaching as a service. And like in Max's case, not only is it collaborative, but he spoke about how we sort of like layer those things on top of them so that the meal plan exists as like an exemplar, as a starting point. But people are ultimately informed that there is quite a large amount of breadth in which you can operate and achieve your goals nutritionally. And I guess that's one of the conceptual problems with like a rigid meal plan is a lot of the rigidity isn't actually required. It's artificial, and a lot of those decisions are quite arbitrary.
Yeah, and I think what we're really speaking about is there's a big difference between, I guess, what we do with the client-centered collaboration of a sample day of eating and the coach-created generic meal plan that, you know, I've got 40 clients on my books and this is the meal plan for the week.
I really like so many things I wanted to say here that I absolutely love from what you blokes have said already. But we have so many people coming to us about with black and white views on food and nutrition who, like, for example, the standard questions like, what's the best food for this? Or what's the best diet for this? Or how much of this do I need to eat for this, right? These very black and white, rigid, one-dimensional views of nutrition. And they're almost up because they're almost scared. They view nutrition that way. They feel like it has to be something so rigid and one-dimensional. Like Mac was saying, that they're desperate for us to take the driver's seat. And like Tommy was saying, that they don't understand initially, like the breadth of different food choices and the so many different ways that they can eat on a day-to-day basis that can help them with their goals. So I feel like if a macro coach, Steve, meal plan is enforced from whoever it is, it sort of reinforces these black and white views in nutrition. I have to follow this plan and this exact way of eating to be able to achieve this. And if I don't, then I'm a failure. And that's the second point that I want to get onto with a lot of people coming to us. It's a generalization who are already self-critical, who already blame themselves for not having enough discipline or not trying hard enough, all these sorts of things. When there's other issues at stake. For example, they haven't got a clear goal. They lack the self-efficacy to make certain changes. And because they're so self-critical, they're in this perpetuating cycle where they set goals too unrealistic and too black and white. They quote unquote fail at them, then they bash themselves for it, and then they come straight back to the start again. So I feel like enforcing a meal plan is sort of opening the door for them to stay in that cycle and to keep quote unquote failing because they can't meet this rigid structure. They just can't account for day-to-day variation and think about how much variation there is in life, how many variables we have to consider. Variation in life, either being great to us or being shit to us. Variation in our hunger and appetite on a certain day. Variation in our mood on a certain day. Variation in financial variables or supermarket variables, like the rising fruit and veg prices at the moment. There's so much variation, which is why I feel like a rigid meal plan structure is it just doesn't allow for that life variation and human variation that comes into the mix. But I absolutely agree that a meal, like whenever even though I get down the eating disorder population route too much, I agree that it can be a really helpful starting point to show someone structure, how a rough exemplar day of eating can be structured for them, and a rough exemplar, I guess, way of building meals and building snacks like the protein and plants model that can help them towards their goals. But then again, like Tommy was saying, we're leaving it a lot of doors open for them to take the driver's seat and for them to make decisions rather than saying it's this way exactly, it's these foods exactly, it's these quantities exactly, or you fail.
Yeah, I agree that it like the pros of a meal plan or a sample day of eating gives you ideas on how to structure your day. It could give you ideas on how to build meals, possible ideas for recipes and portion sizes for your goals, right? But again, I think that is better delivered through a collaboration with the client. And then if they like recipes or if they feel like they need recipes, then, you know, outsourcing that and sending them recipes every week, for example, of, or that could be a strategy that you go through with your clients. Find a recipe that you really want to try online, and let's learn how to fit it into your goals and build it based on the protein and plants model, or whatever your goals may be.
Yeah, I love that one, Josh. And just of a side tangent, I actually had a client recently who has a recipe book that they really like. So we took a few recipes out of that and said, oh, how can we actually, make these more goal-like protein plants, cognizant of the added fats and whatnot. And it was a really fun, thing to go through with the client. I found it quite enjoyable. Anyhow, Alex, I really like how you mentioned the word enforced. That was very macro coach Steve-esque of you to say that. And that brings me into a segue into, I think it's really important how, the whole idea of following some kind of meal plan or example day of eating or whatever you want to call, how that's communicated is really key. Because, like you said, Alex, it can be rigid, this is the one way, this is the only way. But the issues with that, as we've discussed, is it's like a prescription. It doesn't give the client flexibility, and it doesn't account for, life's going to throw a speed bump in the way. And when life does throw a speed bump at your nutrition plan and aspirations, when you inevitably fall short, you're going to feel like you failed, and then sort of go down the what the hell route and kind of throw in the towel. And obviously that's not good for long-term progression. The other thing is, we've got to think about, people losing weight and, the rates of regain, and how difficult it is to keep that weight off. If someone doesn't learn how to eat in a healthful manner, if someone doesn't build the confidence and skills to be able to execute them on their own, when macro coach Steve isn't around to send them a monthly email saying, try harder, here's a new meal plan, that's the same thing, but I've just swapped chicken out for a bit of beef. What are they going to do? What are they going to do when they go on holidays? What are they going to do when it's Sally's going away party at the work office, and there's cake, and they go off their meal plan? What are they going to do then? So here, this highlights a lot of different limitations to the meal plan. I think it's really important to try and present a meal plan as, hey, this is just an example. It's a structure. You don't have to follow it to the T. If something happens, feel free to, do whatever. But, I would recommend, if possible, trying to focus on those protein and plants principles and being cognizant of, the various characteristics of a, goal-aligned meal that would be applicable to the particular client in question.
Definitely. And I think on that too, Mac, with what you were saying about how the presence of the coach enforcing the meal plan sort of facilitates its effectiveness and adherence. I think often the people who are pro meal plan and like to throw it a bit of a bone, that thought process comes from considering self-discipline as being in many ways the ultimate good, as opposed to the actual outcome you're trying to achieve in your values. I think, and I'm sure you guys would agree with me, when we talk about coaching, we tend to think, how do we make this as easy as possible for the individual? Not to say that it's always going to be easy, but because it makes sense to make obtaining the goal as easy as possible. Whereas I think there's that very old school and often very young, I don't have any other life stresses, I don't have a real job, crowd of trainer who goes, okay, I derive my self-esteem and my worth from perceiving myself as being more disciplined than others. And the fact that I have rigid food and exercise behaviors facilitates that. And then when they look at that core part of their identity as being disciplined and rigid is good, it encourages them to try and foist that onto other people without actually considering what the point is.
Yeah, I think a couple of things I want to expand on with that, Tom. But firstly, I just want to say, it's not just macro coach Steve, it's also his girlfriend, Meal Plan Mel, that we can talk about today as well. But like Mac was saying before, it's actually the maintenance of behaviors that is very hard. People know how to lose weight. They don't know how to maintain the weight loss, right? Or whatever goal they have. It's the maintenance that they struggle with. So I've got this note written down is, think about the old quote of if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Same thing with a meal plan. You give someone a meal plan, you feed them for a week. But if you teach them how to create their own meal plans or create their own way of eating, you're going to set them up for success for the rest of their life, right? And you may think it's a pretty poor business model, but it's not, because they are going to be so ecstatic about the results and the confidence that they have. They will either stick around with you because they enjoy the process or they want to continue to learn, or they're going to tell their friends and family about you, right? And that's going to bring in referrals. So from a business model, I think it actually still is really quite good.
It's pretty much already been said with the going away party example from Mac, but the social eating context. Let's say a prescriptive meal plan is given. How do we factor social eating in? Like, that's a massive question we have to ask. Let's say you give them, if it's just one meal plan, or even if it's like a multi-day meal plan, how do we factor in meals at restaurants? How do we factor in meals at cafes? How do we factor a Friday night work party where you're getting plates sent out constantly? It's like tapas. How do you factor in Sunday night dinner at grandma and grandpa's? How do we factor these meals in is the big question. Like, do we account for one meal per week? If we do that, how is the person going to feel? Like, have they, like we've already been talking about, have they been taught the skills to make goal-conscious decisions with food? Have they not? We're just like, okay, go have a free meal per week. They may feel distressed when they go and make food decisions without any structured guidance. Distress is one of the biggest precursors for binge eating. And let's say that they don't feel that distressed in the moment. However, there's certain foods that are presented which have been consciously or subconsciously restrained from their diet during the meal plan process, and they see grandma or grandpa's cake or barbecue, or they go out to a restaurant, they're getting plates sent out constantly, bread and dip and crackers. Like, if these foods have been restrained from the meal plan, they haven't been thought of to being included, then that's another precursor for binge eating. And then we invite in feelings. Number one, their goals haven't been achieved. Number two, we invite feelings in of failure, and we enter that self-perpetuating cycle again. So even though social eating could, like, there is an argument, like we could factor it into a meal plan, there's still so many barriers to doing that safely and effectively. And who are we to say you're not allowed to eat socially? How is that healthy?
I think that the big thing on that too is all of the tools we use ultimately can be used for good or bad. And I think a large part of that determination is whether we use it to facilitate like flexible restraint or rigid restraint. And I think the binge eating example is like the epitome of that, right? Because you have this individual who's exercising so much rigid restraint. They're like, quote unquote, disciplined, using their willpower. They eventually run out and they have that big blowout. Alternatively, like, I think the free meal paradigm can be a really useful one for people who are tracking, say, because there are foods which are difficult to track, especially in that social context. And I think using it as a means of giving people permission to eat socially is really useful if you can tread the line between this is actually goal productive behavior, we have these values in mind, instead of just going, yeah, it's a blowout.
I think, the proposed solution by macro coach Steve to the social eating situation would be just to have a cheat meal, bro, to stoke your metabolism,
Spike the metabolism.
And I think spike the metabolism and meal plan, so it'd be the other way around. They'd be saying, just track it. It's easy. It's easy.
Yeah.
So, but one point I really like that Tom, you've made, Tom, on numerous occasions through this roundtable, is sort of saying like, everything can be used for not good. I think, I can't remember the exact terminology used, but also, why do we want to make the diet and therefore life any more rigid or complicated than it needs to be? Okay. And personally, I think the only argument for a more rigid approach would be acute buy-in at best. But really, like, every argument, like the decisional balance is heavily swayed in, yeah, let's try and make things as flexible and as easy for ourselves or our clients as possible. Because at the end of the day, like I said at the start, you're limited by adherence in terms of efficacy, and consistency is what facilitates notable outcomes, not, hey, I'm going to do this thing for a couple of weeks and then it's too hard, or I feel like a failure because I had Sally's work going away party or something. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but even speaking about difficulty, all right, imagine if someone starts their nutrition and health and fitness journey and they get a meal plan that has 3 meals and 2 snacks per day, and they have to like basically turn their current diet completely upside down, change 5 meals a day for 7 days a week, or even let's say they do it 5 days a week, that's 25 meals they now have to change, right? That's quite a lot. And then especially if meal plan Mel has a different roster of meals every couple of days, they're like, shit, I've got to prepare these different meals, and that's going to be really quite difficult to do. Whereas at FNC we look at from Dr. Gary Mendoza, the reverse pyramid, try and stack behaviors up one at a time to build confidence, rather than, all right, let's turn your life and your diet upside down for this meal plan, and then guess what, we're going to change it again next week once you finally get into a bit of a routine.
I think one of the slightly cruel ironies of that situation is, if you're someone whose eating behaviors and food are like quite divergent from what we would tend to accept as like quote unquote healthy or like health seeking, if you're someone who has a lot of space to make up, you can change a lot of things. You're going to get better even with small changes. So like I once worked with a bloke who was drinking over 2 liters of Coke a day. And like when we had like that initial consult, I was like, oh yeah, like what's your diet? Like what's going on? And I just suggested, hey dude, like you could switch out that Coke for Diet Coke, and you don't need to change anything else, and you're going to drop weight. And he dropped like 5 kilos in 3 weeks. And he just thought like, oh, like this is incredible. I've never been able to do this before. So it's funny in that the people who might actually seem like the biggest candidates for a rigid meal plan to your average Joe, because they're so far from what we would think is classically appropriate, are also the people who are probably going to get better with the smallest of changes too, because they have so much ground to make up.
Low-hanging fruit.
Or
that low-hanging fruit. Like you were saying, Josh, like completely overhauling everything they are doing with the meal plan is like climbing that motherfucking tree to the top, right? I know. And the whole time I was thinking about that is just the anxiety over that shopping list and that shopping trolley, and then having like 6 different protein sources on the bench and all those different fruit and vegetables and everything on the bench. Like, what do I do with all this stuff? And just the burden, and like factoring in other life stresses as well and other commitments, like the burden of having to change so much, like so quickly, and then feeling like, oh my gosh, I have to do all of this to make the changes that I want to, when they don't actually have to climb the tree for that highest fruit to make those changes. Like Tommy was saying, like that Coke is an extreme example, but it's such a good example of like so many other things in people's lives that they could change pretty readily and pretty quickly that would actually help them so much more. And then, like you were saying, habit stacking, there's probably so many of those changes that can be made before they even quote unquote need a meal plan.
Yeah, exactly. And they have it like that, again, the generic meal plan to 30 of your clients. One, it doesn't factor in, individual differences, but it doesn't factor in your client's family or partners or anything like that. Like, what if you go, all right, fish tacos is on the recipe tonight, but your client's partner is allergic to fish. Like, so the last thing I said was, like you don't factor in your client's family or who they live with or anything like that at all.
I think one big issue with a lot of meal plans that I've observed from, gym challenges and even gyms that I've worked at in my lifetime have been needless restriction where you're not enhancing results at all. And Tom, you mentioned this before. It's just like you're creating another thing to think about, another expense, another mental resource and time investment that is not going to enhance the outcome in accordance with the goal. An example would be these things like, you have to have red meat and nuts for breakfast, which I've seen. It's like, well, why can't we have oats? And or like no caffeine. or you have to eat. One meal plan I saw was, in the morning, you have to have a glass of filtered water. It could be tap water with apple cider vinegar, and then you had to have a glass of cranberry juice with it, and I think there was lemon and salt in it or something like that. Real guru shit. And like, this is just making the diet and the life so much harder and restrictive than it needs to be. It's taking time and mental resources away from other areas of life that could be flourishing. And it is creating more levels of, oh, hey, more things to think about where they would fall to the wayside, like more opportunities for things to fall to the wayside whenever life throws a speed bump in the way. Like, oh, you're on a work trip. How are you going to do your little shot glass of freaking apple cider vinegar and do that? And you can't do it. Oh, I feel like a failure. And then the whole day's out the window. So it's creating more opportunities for that what the hell effect to occur. And yeah, obviously that's not good for adherence. And as I mentioned before, why are you spending these mental resources when it's not going to actually make anything better? It's a complete waste of time. And I think that is an issue with a lot of meal plans. People throw the kitchen sink at it, not really realizing or having any awareness of, hey, is this actually doing anything? They're just like, oh, I heard it might work, or it's just what you do. So yeah, I think that's a major problem that I've seen, at least.
Sorry, Tommy. No, you go.
I think one of the things you touched on there, Mac, is at the moment it's really trendy to talk about how, oh yeah, I only add things to people's like food, especially in the beginning. And I think within reason, that's a really good approach. You just add more foods which are going to fill them up. They're probably going to spontaneously eat less. But I think sometimes those additions are actually subtractions, or at least restrictions in disguise, because they come at a cost. Like, you're not simply saying, hey man, I want you to eat 2 serves of fruit today, grab an apple and eat it whenever. You're going, okay, this is a structured, ritualistic part of your day, which is going to take time and energy. And sure, we've added meat and nuts for breakfast, but we've also stopped them from having a thing they enjoy at that time, potentially.
On this note, going off what Max said, the guru shit, that's one problem that we have here in this space. How do we make low-hanging fruit, habit stacking, helping someone to be in the driver's seat? Like, how do we make that sexy? That's a big problem that we have, because all of these ridiculous guru fad diets, whatever you want to call them, people, and I don't even understand the in-depth psychology behind this, people are attracted to them because they're exciting and they've got these big, wild promises that they're going to bring us. And there must be something with, obviously there's the sexiness aura around them. If there's celebrities following them, or if someone with a rig or a bikini body, whatever you want to call it, is posting this, right? There's false promises behind them, but they're so extreme that people almost like want to sink their teeth into it and do this extreme challenge, whether they believe it's going to work or not. Often they do, unfortunately. It's sexy at the end of the day, versus what our approach is, which is ultimately going to be more helpful for them in the long term. But I feel like people almost feel like it's too general and too broad and not extreme enough, and therefore it's not attractive or exciting. So that's a big problem. That's $1 million question. If we want to live in mansions and drive Ferraris, how do we make our approach sexy?
Yeah, $1 million question.
Yeah,
for people to be attracted. I think we should all do gear together. I think that's a and then rigs on the gram.
What you talk about there, Alex, is so in the book called Made to Stick, right, by I think it's by Dan and Chip Heath, they talk about obviously why some ideas stick and why some don't, even if they're true or not. And one of those is credibility, right? So credibility now could be having a really big following. It could be having the word doctor in front of your name, right? It could be having a decent rig. And like I said, that they're good following, or speaking with conviction. When someone says something so convincingly and it looks like they know what they're talking about, or they may be an expert in another field, people will just go, all right, he must be right with what he's saying, so I'm going to do what he says.
I think that's the one issue that legitimate nutrition professionals and researchers and whatnot face is, you know, we're always speaking with, oh, this is probably, you know, the case. This is likely, you know, there's rarely a certainty or a speaking with so much confidence and like assertiveness. And, you know, whereas you see the gurus, they're like, see this water here? This is the worst thing you could possibly do for yourself. This is going to kill you. This is going to kill you right now because it's not filtered or something stupid like that.
Well, I think part of that.
People like that. It's said so confidently.
We've got more internet issues. They're doing work on the internet at Max Place too.
In the Palace.
Now we've lost Tom.
No, we've lost you, Mac.
No, we lost you, Mac. That's on you. Sorry, mate. Well, no, but I guess like to take up on that idea, I think the meta is like a sexy external solution, like the one secret trick, like, oh no, you need to add salt to your food or Himalayan rock salt. Sort of functions on the implication that you yourself lack the power and that there's an external force which will solve the problem for you. And I think when people continuously engage in that like repeated diet and failed diet process, it ultimately robs self-efficacy and it makes it harder and harder for them to actually look inwards and go, is there something wrong with my approach and how I'm thinking about it? And is there some guru, is there some wizard who can wave their magical stick and give me the quote unquote answer?
Just to jump onto that one, Tom, putting my coach of the coaches hat on, I wonder if, you know, if we also go back to the meal plan situation, do coaches default to a meal plan because they're not confident in their coaching approach?
Yeah, I feel like that's a really, really good point there, Josh. Yeah, it's sort of like where do I start? It's sort of like sometimes, I don't know, I get this feeling sometimes, it's like, where do I start with this? Right? Like I don't automatically jump to a meal planners per se, but sometimes I feel like, where do I start? With just showing them something, showing them this example, be it and it can be a starting point, but sometimes it may not be an appropriate starting point. So I really like that. But I thought of something before. I think you go first, Matt.
Oh, sorry. I just thought you were done there. My apologies, mate. I think a big part of it is just like being a client-centered coach where you are creating personalized, collaboratively designed plans and interventions. Well, firstly, that's probably going to require a Zoom call or a video call of some description. That's time and effort. Also, it means you probably can't take on as many clients because, you know, if you're doing the generic meal plan thing, you're probably spending about 60 seconds per client per month. So you can have, 100, 200 clients. So, in the short term, from a laziness perspective, from a financial perspective, that's probably a big factor, I would say anyway. It's laziness. But I actually think, and Josh he'll freaking agree with me on this one, that's going to bite you in the ass from a business perspective. Okay, because you're not going to feel fulfilled. Working with clients and the job of being a coach is not going to be as rewarding because clients aren't going to get fantastic results. You're not going to build that rapport, that connection. You're not going to get to know your clients. And therefore, it's going to be a very monotonous job. You're just going through the motions and you're at risk of burnout. So in the long run, from a business perspective, it's probably a superior idea to be a little bit more client-centered rather, and actually spend the time and effort to get to know your clients and work.
And I think a big part of that's like the way in which you appraise the world, right? Because a lot of coaches bang on about personal responsibility because it allows them to shift blame from themselves to the client. And I think if you get stuck in that space where you rationalize your client's lack of success as being an artifact of them not being good enough, it only reinforces your perception that you're doing the perfect job. And I think alternatively, it's a little more scary to go, hang on, am I actually doing the best job here possible? And what kind of things can I take responsibility for in delivering a better service for your client? And I think, like Max says, there's a bit of burnout there because that not higher risk, but that greater level of thought and care is like infinitely more rewarding, despite the fact it's also more scary initially. Whereas if you're just sending emails, like, there's not much fulfillment there.
Yeah. Hey, hot bitches, this is your meal plan for the week. Like, that's not that fulfilling, right? But even then, like, I just don't think it's a great use of your time for creating meal plans for people, especially if we know they're probably not going to follow it in the first place.
Yeah.
Like, seriously, like how shit must you feel then if I spent all this time, creating this meal plan this week, and I haven't used the same recipe for the last 4 months, and I just don't know why they're not doing it. I'm giving them variety. They're not following it. Well, like Tom said, maybe the coach has to take responsibility for their coaching style. And instead of spending all your time creating meal plans, work on the coaching skills, spend that time with each client.
Yeah. You know what is the funniest thing here? That'll happen. They'll create the meal plan and they'll be like, oh, these meals have 20 ingredients and require 2 hours to prep, and there's 6 of them a day. But these clients aren't following it. Instead of trying to be a better coach and trying to help my clients and learn more, I'm going to go on Instagram and make a reel that tells the world how my clients are lazy and and how they lack grit and they suck.
Yeah.
And then so I'm basically going to go on social media and talk shit about my clients.
I think one of the problems with social media is that because there's like that normal distribution of client outcomes, right? If you have enough reach and you can get enough people to buy, you're almost guaranteed, just statistically, to get a couple of good before and afters. So you end up with like this horrendous churn rate, but this really impressive size client book with 3 or 4 people really carrying you because they're enough of an outlier that it makes your whole system begin to look good.
Yeah, and it worked for this person, so it could work for you.
Could.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was it? Oh, I was going to mention something earlier as well. I lost it.
Another this goes on the same note, making it sexy. How do we speak with more conviction then? Is it in the first couple of sessions that we need to speak with, let's say, more conviction about our very unsexy approach? Because I agree with you, like, we're plagued by imposter syndrome and the Dunning-Kruger effect. And we realize how much none of us actually know because it's just changing so constantly. So like, how can we communicate our approach with more conviction in early stages or on social media? Because I feel like that's also a risk, right? Because there's these social media personalities with all of their fantastic results, it could work for you and their rigs or their bodies or whatever, that buy in with people's insecurities, and then they keep the people in the insecurity loop. How can we speak with more conviction on social media that our unsexy approach can actually help them? Because I agree with you, like in the literature, at the end of every fucking paper, there's more research is needed on this topic, which there is, but at the same time that reaffirms we know nothing. And then when we speak about the research on social media, we're always impartial and we're trying to be as minimally biased as possible. Therefore, people either perceive that as that's not going to help me, or they're going to perceive it with uncertainty. They don't know what they're talking about. Macro coach Steve or macro coach Mel knows what they're talking about because they told me that this definitely would work. So how can we speak with more conviction?
I think like maybe not so much on social media, but in a coaching context. I know Alex and Josh, actually, sorry, Mac, I've left you out. Something I've spoken to both of you recently is like asking the client, what do they want? What do they think they're going to get? And potentially sprinkling in a little bit of that to keep them engaged, bought in, and then so you can turn the dial either way. I recently had someone come to me who was just certain they needed a meal plan. So I sat down with them, I built one out. First check-in, Tom, I went off my meal plan, and it was, instead of getting a high protein yogurt brand, they got like a normal protein yogurt. And I sat there like, that is, one, that's not remotely an issue. But two, I think giving someone the opportunity to see that system fail in a safe space can help you leverage the discussion of, hey, like, we've seen this doesn't necessarily work. How can we tweak this approach? How can we shift it more and more towards a bit more flexibility, towards a better approach there?
Yeah. I think, again, I don't think it's, again, like Tom said, not about social media. It's having the conversation with clients or people that may be interested, or they may spark a conversation with us, and they may say, oh, I just need a meal plan. And even just like going through asking them some questions. Have you done a meal plan before? Oh yeah. And did it work for you? Oh no. like the question of like, how is that working for you, or how has that worked for you in the past? And then explaining a little bit more about the way that we do things. And it's meeting people, with what they want, but also what they need. So, okay, you want a meal plan? Here's what we can do instead that we know is going to be, more beneficial for you in the long run as well. But I think, like I said before, it's almost like a default option for some coaches who aren't confident in their approach. And they're not confident in actually saying to the clients, no, like I don't do meal plans, because they think everyone wants meal plans. But just because everyone wants meal plans doesn't mean that they're effective or that you should do them, right? Because I think a lot of people that don't understand what a nutritionist does, or a dietitian does, or a nutrition coach does, they'll just come to you and say, oh, can I get a meal plan? Rather than you then saying, oh, actually, I don't do meal plans. They go, oh, wow, what do you do instead? Oh, I do ongoing coaching that goes for at least 3 months. And oh, okay, can you tell me more about that? People's first thought is, you're a nutritionist. 1, you must be vegan. And 2, you do meal plans.
3, you've got a rig.
Yeah.
I think I like what Tom said about, respecting the client's autonomy. And we can go through that Socratic questioning and kind of delineate, need versus want as far as it, and what didn't work in the past and whatnot. But I think there's a lot of situations where, a client's going to do what they want to do. And, it's almost in the long run can be superior to let them explore that in a safe space. And you've created that safe space where your position is to keep them safe whilst they realize on their own accord that, meal plan be what they want, but it's not what they need. And then once they've gone through that experience and they've come to that realization on their own, that's when they're going to be more receptive to what, discussions will lead to as far as alternative interventions. So I think that's a big thing as well. And you're totally right. Like, oh, you're a sports nutritionist. Oh, can you write me a plan? Like, that's sort of the thing that we get, straight off the bat. Like, how much for a plan? So shifting more.
Yeah, I guess like the other level to that is you can do people far more good working with them than if you let someone else potentially do a worse job. So I think like the meal plan or tracking macros are both like perfect examples of this, right? Because if a client really wants to do that, you can work with them and collaborate and do it in the safest, most productive way possible. But if you say, nah, sorry, I don't do that, and you actually push them away, they're still going to seek that out. And their chance of seeing a practitioner who's not very good, who doesn't really care, who's just going to throw something at them, is way higher. So I think sometimes you've got to keep people like in your corner, even if they're not necessarily playing ball the way you'd like ideally have them do so.
Yeah, and that's why I think we go through. No, I don't do meal plans, but here's what we do instead. It's that set. Like we keep coming back to. We don't do a coach-generated generic meal plan. We do a client collaborative sample data meeting.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what I was asking before. That is speaking with conviction. Hey, we are collaborating with them. we're both in the driver's seat, if you like. We're collaborating with them, but at the same time, we are confident in our answer. That and number one, we may draw it out of them. It may not have worked in the past, but B, we are confident in our answer because we know what generally works for clients, or in other words, we know how we can generally best help clients in the long term. And
and speak as a coach, like it's that conviction, that confidence comes from experience as well, of knowing that this approach is more beneficial in the long run than a generic meal plan. So if you want to build your coaching skills, Hero Nutrition Mentoring.
Plugs, absolute plug.
Yeah, and like me, you can have 5 Ferraris sitting at the front of my mansion.
Yeah, and people doing work upstairs on the chandelier.
Yeah, Mac is actually permanent on holidays now.
That's it. Yeah. Look at Mac. He lives in Bali and he still he's an online coach.
Mm.
No.
Do you feel like that threatens your identity much, Mac?
Yes, I do actually, because it's still that part of me that's like, got to have grit, just work all the time and like never take a break, no days off, brother.
Yeah, I was thinking it's a bit like I'm not like other girls, isn't it? I'm an online fitness coach who lives in Bali.
There's 5 surfboards, he doesn't have 5 Lamborghinis.
Yeah.
It's true. Sure.
All right, lads. Any other closing thoughts? I think we've covered quite a bit with meal plans.
I think that's me, and like
no closing thoughts from me.
I won't open up the can of worms tangent, but I think it also starts with any form of formal nutrition qualification, starting this earlier. There's so many system overhauls, and again, that's a can of worms. So there's so many system overhauls in the way that nutrition professionals are taught.
Yeah.
Away from this prescription, especially in the outpatient private practice community-based setting, how, apart from very certain niches where meal plans may be needed, how we can coach better. I feel like it's just, there's so much education overhaul that is needed. But from prescription, away from prescription, more towards collaboration. Yeah.
And I think, like before we open a can of worms on this topic, there's so many books out there on, work less, systemize your business, all these, like I've read them, right? But you can't systemize personalized coaching. You can't systemize one-on-one life-changing coaching. Like you can't. You can systemize meal plans, but it doesn't mean they're going to work, right? Yeah. You can make one meal plan that's going to feed 7 billion people, but is it going to help people? No, it's not. And I get very passionate about this, but why did you get into this job in the first place? To change lives. Is what you're doing changing lives? No, then change your approach.
And on that too, without being a shill for big uni, I think that, and it's super easy for me to say this because I'm biased, but I think if you really do care about changing lives, you should aspire to know as much, both in the theory and the practical sense as possible, to be able to help others. And if you're a PT listening to this, part of that means doing the relevant upskilling and learning about nutrition in a formalized sense and not like a weekend course. Sometimes there's genuinely no replacement for doing the learning you don't necessarily want to do. Like, I don't want to learn the Krebs cycle again. But having a fundamental background in physiology helps me make decisions and sort of vet research and ideas when I come across them.
Yeah, spot on. Yeah, so sports nutrition accreditation, go do that. Become a dietitian if you want to as well, but go through the formal process that you need to do. And just because, I'll finish with probably another thing, is that just because you can do a meal plan doesn't mean that you should.
Yeah.
I think that's what may kind of get in the way of sports like SNA, right? When you're qualified at SNA, you can do a meal plan, but it doesn't mean that you should.
Just one more point I wanted to make. The more coach-centered approach might not be changing lives, but it will be getting you 5 Ferraris in front of your mansion.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's it. So why'd you get into this job in the first place? 5 Ferraris. Fuck, sweet. You're in. All right, lads, we'll finish it there until next time, next month. Looking forward to it. Thank you for your time this morning.